I've always been the afterthought in my family's story. The epilogue, the footnote at the bottom of the page that most people skip over. My sister Jaime, on the other hand, has always been the protagonist, the golden child whose accomplishments were celebrated with extravagant dinners and whose failures were cushioned by endless second chances and comforting words. The earliest memory I have of understanding my place in our family hierarchy happened when I was 7 years old. I had spent weeks practicing for my first piano recital, my small fingers fumbling over ivory keys until they finally found their rhythm. When the day came, I played Fur-Elise without a single mistake. I remember scanning the audience afterward, my heart swelling with pride, only to find my parents' seats empty. Later that night, I learned they had taken Jaime shopping for a new dress for her middle school dance. They forgot about my recital entirely. Mom kissed the top of my head and said, "There'll be other recitals, sweetie." But the damage was already done. Jaime is only 2 years older than me, but the gap between us has always felt like a vast, unbridgeable canyon. She was born with my father's athletic prowess and my mother's effortless charm, a genetic lottery winner who could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was awkward and introverted, more comfortable with books than with people. My sister was the star athlete. I was the quiet bookworm. She collected trophies. I collected rejection notices. She was the sun, and I was merely a planet caught in her gravitational pull. "Lucy, why can't you be more like your sister?" became the unofficial family motto, repeated so often that it might as well have been cross-stitched and hung on our living room wall. Each time I heard those words, I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and less visible. By high school, I had mastered the art of fading into the background, of requiring so little that nobody would be disappointed when they inevitably forgot about me. The pattern continued through our college years. Jaime attended an Ivy League school on a partial athletic scholarship, with our parents proudly covering the remainder of her tuition. They flew to every one of her important games, posted her achievements all over social media, and bragged about her to anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs to put myself through community college before transferring to a state university. I struggled with student loans and shared a tiny apartment with 3 other girls to save on rent. Not once did my parents offer to help. "We already have 1 college tuition to pay," Dad would say, as if I should understand that their financial resources and their pride were reserved exclusively for my sister. When I graduated with honors in accounting, my parents attended the ceremony but left early to make it to Jaime's end of season team dinner. She had just been named MVP again. My achievement paled in comparison, as it always did. I remember standing alone in my cap and gown, watching other graduates celebrate with their families, feeling the familiar ache of being insufficient. Despite everything, I built a life for myself. I landed a decent job at a mid-sized accounting firm, found my own apartment, and slowly began to chip away at my mountain of student debt. I made friends who valued my quiet strength and dry humor. I dated men who really saw me, instead of looking past me for someone more exciting, more like Jaime. I started to believe that maybe I could outrun the shadow of second best that had followed me since childhood. Then, 3 years ago, my father lost his job. The recession had hit his industry hard, and at 58, he found himself unemployable in his field. My mother, who had only worked part-time throughout our childhood, couldn't suddenly become the primary breadwinner. They burned through their savings quickly, and when they were facing foreclosure on their house, they called me, not Jaime, for help. "It's just temporary," Mom promised over the phone, her voice tight with embarrassment. "Just until your father finds something new." I didn't hesitate. Despite years of emotional neglect, they were still my parents, so I started sending them money each month, first $500, then $800, eventually $1,200 as their needs grew. I cut back on everything in my own life. I moved to a smaller apartment in a less desirable area. I sold my car and took public transportation. I stopped going out with friends and buying new clothes. I put my own dreams of graduate school on hold. Jaime, meanwhile, was living in Boston with her husband Mark, a surgeon she'd met during her brief stint in medical school before deciding it wasn't for her. She had a beautiful house in an exclusive neighborhood, took lavish vacations, and worked part-time at a nonprofit because she needed something fulfilling. When our parents' financial troubles began, she sent them a one-time check for $1,000 and considered her duty fulfilled. "You know how it is, Luce," she said during one of our infrequent phone calls. "We're saving for a down payment on a vacation home in the Berkshires. I wish I could do more." The worst part was that our parents never expected her to do more. They thanked her profusely for her generosity while treating my monthly sacrifices as an obligation. They'd call to tell me about the dinner Jaime had treated them to when she was in town, or the expensive birthday gift she'd sent, never connecting the dots that these luxuries were only possible because I was covering their basic needs. For 2 years, I sustained this arrangement. I watched my savings dwindle while my resentment grew. Each month when I transferred money to their account, I told myself it was the right thing to do. Each month, I believed it a little less. My breaking point came last June at Jaime's 31st birthday dinner. Our parents had asked me to help organize it at an upscale restaurant in our hometown, where Jaime and Mark were visiting for the weekend. I spent hours making arrangements, even though I could barely afford my portion of the bill. I bought her a modest but thoughtful gift, a first edition of her favorite childhood book that I'd hunted down online. I even took a day off work to drive 4 hours to be there. The dinner started pleasantly enough. Jaime looked radiant, as always, in an expensive dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Mark was charming and attentive, refilling wine glasses and taking photos to commemorate the occasion. Our parents beamed with pride each time they looked at their eldest daughter. I sat quietly, smiling when appropriate, trying to ignore the familiar feeling of invisibility that crept over me in their presence. Then came the toasts. Dad went first, his voice thick with emotion as he praised Jaime's accomplishments and character. "You've never given us a moment's worry," he said, raising his glass. "You've exceeded every expectation we ever had." Mom followed with a teary tribute to her perfect daughter who makes everything in life look effortless. When it was Mark's turn, he stood and wrapped an arm around my sister's shoulders. "I'm the luckiest man alive to have married the incredible woman your parents raised," he said. "Thank you both for giving the world such a wonderful human being." And then Jaime stood up, her eyes glistening. She thanked each person at the table individually, her husband for his support, her friends for their loyalty, our father for being her hero, our mother for being her best friend. When she came to me, she paused. "And Lucy," she said with a practiced smile, "thanks for always being there in the background, making things happen without needing any recognition. You're the best little sister." The table chuckled, and I forced a smile, even as her words cut through me. Always in the background, not needing recognition. The perpetual supporting actress in the Jaime show. But it was her final toast that broke me. Raising her glass toward our parents, she said, "Most of all, I want to thank you both for raising me as your most cherished daughter who needed nothing because you gave me everything. I know how lucky I am to have been loved so completely." The table erupted in applause. Our mother wiped away tears. Our father puffed out his chest with pride. And I sat there, invisible again, my hands clenched so tightly around my napkin that my knuckles turned white. 29 years of being second best, of having my needs ignored, of watching them give Jaime everything while I struggled alone, crystallized in that moment into a perfect, clarifying rage. I don't remember deciding to speak. I only remember the sudden silence as I stood, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. All eyes turned to me, expressions ranging from surprise to mild annoyance at the interruption of their perfect family tableau. "I have an announcement too," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Starting next month, I will no longer be sending you money. I looked directly at my parents, whose expressions shifted from confusion to embarrassment. For the past 2 years, I've been supporting Mom and Dad financially while you've been planning your vacation home purchase. This, directed at Jaime, whose perfect smile faltered for the first time that evening. Lucy, this isn't the time, my father began, but I cut him off. When is the time, Dad? When has there ever been time for me in this family? I put myself through college while you paid Jaime's tuition. I've been working since I was 16 while she focused on sports. I've been sending you $200 every month, money I can't afford, while she buys you expensive gifts with her surgeon husband's money and gets all the credit for being generous. The table had gone completely silent. Mark looked down at his plate. My mother's face had drained of color. Jaime stared at me with a mixture of shock and something else. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe just surprise that her invisible sister had suddenly materialized with a voice. I've spent my entire life being compared to Jaime and found wanting, I continued, my voice beginning to shake. I've been the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who sacrifices without complaint. And I'm done. I'm done being this family's ATM while remaining its afterthought. I reached for my purse and placed several bills on the table to cover my portion of the meal. Happy birthday, Jaime. Enjoy being the most cherished daughter. It's a role you've played perfectly. With that, I walked out, ignoring my mother's calls and my father's suddenly stern voice demanding I come back. For the first time in my life, I didn't obey. For the first time, I chose myself. The drive back to my apartment that night was a blur. I remember crying so hard at one point that I had to pull over, my body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from some deep, hidden place inside me. But beneath the pain and the guilt was something else, something unexpected, relief, freedom, as if I'd been carrying a weight for so long that I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. When I finally made it home and collapsed onto my bed, still in my dinner clothes, I felt lighter than I had in years. The apartment I had once resented for its smallness suddenly seemed like a sanctuary. It was mine, paid for with my hard work, filled with my choices. No one else's expectations hung in the air. No one else's achievements eclipsed mine here. The aftermath was exactly as messy as you might expect. My phone exploded with texts and calls, angry ones from my father, pleading ones from my mother, a single, tersely worded one from Jaime that read, "Way to make my birthday all about you." I silenced my phone and slept for 12 hours straight. When I finally woke up and faced the digital onslaught, I did something I'd never done before. I held my ground. I didn't apologize. I didn't cave to the emotional manipulation. I didn't send more money when my father called to say they wouldn't make their mortgage payment without my help. Instead, I suggested he look into downsizing, just as I had done to support them. "This isn't fair, Lucy," he said, his voice hard. "We're your parents. We gave you everything." "No, Dad," I replied quietly. "You gave Jaime everything. I gave myself everything. And then I gave to you too. I have nothing left to give right now." The weeks that followed were difficult. My parents cycled through anger, guilt-tripping, and finally, desperate bargaining. Jaime called once to tell me I was being selfish and childish. "Families help each other," she lectured. "That's what they're for." "Yes," I agreed. "Families help each other, all members of the family, equally." My resolve was tested daily, but each time I stood firm, I felt stronger. I started seeing a therapist to help me navigate the guilt and set healthy boundaries. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected while working overtime to support my parents. I even started dating again, meeting a kind, thoughtful man named Ethan who listened when I spoke and saw me for who I was, not who I wasn't. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. My mother called one day, her voice subdued, and asked if we could meet for coffee. When we did, she didn't mention money. Instead, she asked questions about my job, my friends, my interests, questions she'd never bothered to ask before. She listened to my answers with an attentiveness that felt foreign and fragile. "I've been thinking about what you said," she admitted as our cups emptied. "About always feeling second best. I never meant to make you feel that way, Lucy. Jaime was just always so demanding. She needed so much from us. You were so self-sufficient, so capable. I think we took that for granted." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was a start. A crack in the foundation of our family mythology. A tiny acknowledgement that perhaps the story we'd all been living wasn't the only possible narrative. My father took longer to come around. His pride was wounded, both by my public stand and by his continued unemployment. But economic reality eventually forced him to take a job well below his previous status, something I'd been suggesting for months. It was humbling for him, but also humanizing. For the first time, he experienced what it was like to work hard and still struggle. To feel invisible, to be valued less than he deserved. 3 months after I stopped sending money, he called me on a Sunday afternoon. "I found a smaller place," he said abruptly. "Your mother and I are downsizing to a condo. It's not what we're used to, but it's what we can afford now." "That's good, Dad," I said, waiting for the request that usually followed these updates, thinly veiled hint that they still needed my help, just a little, just temporarily. Instead, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "I wanted to thank you," he said, the words coming out stiffly, "for helping us for as long as you did. It couldn't have been easy." The acknowledgement, as minimal as it was, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "It wasn't," I admitted. "No," he agreed after a pause. "I don't suppose it was." We didn't have a Hollywood moment of reconciliation. He didn't suddenly apologize for years of favoritism or neglect. But something shifted between us. A mutual recognition, perhaps. A first step towards something more honest. If not yet whole, Jaime was the last holdout. She maintained a chilly distance, offended by what she saw as my attack on her character and position in the family. It wasn't until Thanksgiving, when we all gathered at my parents' new, modest condo, that she approached me. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes alone, while everyone else watched football in the living room, some dynamics die hard, when she appeared in the doorway. "Need help?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I handed her a dish towel wordlessly, and for several minutes we worked in silence, me washing, her drying. "I didn't know," she finally said, not looking at me. "About the money. About how much you were giving them. Mom and Dad never told me." "Would it have mattered if they had?" I asked, passing her another plate. She considered this, her usually confident expression clouded with uncertainty. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'd like to think it would have, but I've never had to think about money the way you have. That's not my fault." "No," I agreed. "It's not your fault that they gave you everything and expected me to fend for myself. But it is your fault that you never noticed, that you accepted their favoritism as your birthright, that you stood up at your birthday dinner and thanked them for making you their most cherished daughter without ever considering what that meant for me." She flinched, but didn't argue. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I've always been jealous of you, you know." I almost dropped the glass I was washing. "What?" "You're so complete," she said, struggling to find the right words. "You built yourself from scratch. Everything you have, you earned. I've always wondered what would happen to me if all the support systems disappeared, if people stopped making allowances for me, if I had to do it all on my own like you did." I stared at her, this person I'd envied and resented my entire life, and saw for the first time the insecurity beneath her confidence, the fear beneath her entitlement. It didn't excuse anything, but it complicated the narrative I'd constructed. The golden child had her own doubts, her own struggles, her own story that wasn't as perfect as it appeared from the outside. "I'm sorry," she said finally, meeting my eyes, "for never seeing how hard it's been for you, for taking up all the oxygen in the room, for accepting their favoritism without question. It wasn't everything. It didn't erase the past or guarantee a different future. But like my mother's questions and my father's thanks, it was a crack in the old story, a possibility of something new." "I forgive you," I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. Not completely, not all at once, but enough to start. Enough to breathe a little easier in her presence. That Thanksgiving marked a turning point. Not a fairy tale ending where all hurts were healed and all issues resolved, but a beginning of a different relationship with my family. One where I had a voice, where my needs mattered, where I was visible. In the year since then, I've continued to build the life I want on my terms. I enrolled in graduate school part-time, pursuing the advanced degree I'd always dreamed of. I moved to a better apartment, one with large windows that fill the rooms with light. Ethan and I are still together, talking cautiously about a future that once seemed impossible to imagine. My parents and I maintain a careful relationship, improved but still fragile. They call more often, ask real questions, listen to my answers. Sometimes they slip into old patterns, comparing me to Jaime, focusing on her accomplishments, forgetting important events in my life. But now I speak up when they do. I refuse to fade into the background. I insist on being seen. Jaime and I are working on building a relationship as adults, separate from our roles in our family's hierarchy. It's awkward and occasionally painful, but also revealing. She's not the perfect, confident person I resented for so long, just as I'm not the meek, invisible girl I was conditioned to be. We're both complex, flawed humans trying to unlearn the dynamics that shaped us. Last week, I received a letter from my father. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter, the kind he used to send Jaime when she was at college. Inside was a check, not a large amount, but symbolic, and a note that read, "For your graduate school expenses. I should have helped the first time. I'm proud of you, Lucy." I sat on my couch, holding that piece of paper, feeling the weight of the words my 7-year-old self had longed to hear, that my 16-year-old self had given up on, that my 25-year-old self had convinced herself she didn't need. "I'm proud of you, Lucy." 5 simple words that couldn't erase the past but might help build a future. I didn't cash the check. The amount wasn't enough to make a difference in my tuition, and more importantly, I needed to maintain the financial independence I'd fought so hard to establish. But I kept the note, tucked it into my journal as a marker of change, however small. This morning, as I was getting ready for class, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Thinking of you today. Good luck on your presentation. You'll be brilliant." It was a small thing, this remembering, this acknowledgement of my life and its important moments. But as I read her words, I felt a warmth spread through me, not the desperate hunger for approval that had driven me for so long, but something gentler, the quiet satisfaction of being seen, of mattering. I am still learning to put myself first, without guilt. To accept love without suspecting it comes with conditions. To believe I am worthy without needing external validation. Some days are harder than others. The old patterns of behavior and thought don't disappear overnight, or even over months. They linger, ready to reassert themselves in moments of stress or vulnerability. But I am no longer the second daughter, the afterthought, the footnote in my own life story. I am the protagonist now, the author, the one who decides what happens next. And what happens next is entirely up to me.